Okay, so the sun's come out on day one of the Farnborough International Airshow, thankfully, and we have moved now to the L3Harris chalet, and we're about to interview Alan Crawford, who is their president of commercial aviation. Okay, so hello Alan.
Hello.
In the background you'll be able to hear, there is a demonstration going on. It's a helicopter this time, but they should be able to hear us.
I think so. A bit quieter than the F-35 before.
This is what all the fun of coming to an airshow is all about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
See the product in action. So,
makes it real. Yeah.
Thanks for doing this, and welcome to ABNcast. Really happy to have you on board. Obviously, we commit this from a civil and commercial aviation point of view. L3Harris does a lot in defence as well.
Yes.
But just give us a few ideas on what you're talking to the civil and commercial sector about in the next few days.
So we cover a range of training products, from products such as flight simulators through to training folks how to fly in our academy. We provide avionics for both commercial and military customers, flight recorders, surveillance or T3CAS, displays, and then data analytics across the full spectrum as well.
Okay, let's start with the training aspect of that. Obviously, so pilot training, simulators, etc. There's been a lot of talk about people in the industry and maybe a lack of people.
Sure.
You always get the pilots and cabin crew because they're the more obvious people in the industry. But actually, there's a crunch across the whole industry. But where are we, do you think, currently on pilots? You see some quite astonishing figures about the number of pilots the aviation industry is going to have to find in the next 5-10 years to meet demand. Where are things at, do you think?
Yeah, so it is the I guess the second phase of the pilot shortage that we've been talking about for a number of years. So that obviously abated a bit as demand went down during COVID. And then we're in the fortunate position where the industry is rebounding and in a really high growth phase, but that is driving a huge amount of pilot need. So it is definitely true to say that the demand for new pilots currently outstrips supply. So we're looking at new ways in which we can improve that pipeline of pilots, and then obviously there's questions around retention and training and things that we can do to help keep pilots in airlines. So it's a great problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless we've got to deal with.
Yeah, and where are these new pilots, do you think, where they're going to come from? Are we going to see new source markets, pilots coming from countries that are really sort of only just coming into the aviation sector?
Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is make sure we're addressing the whole population. So generally speaking, pilots have not been an industry that is well represented by female pilots. So the first thing we've got to do is make it attractive and make it clear that it is a great career opportunity for female pilots as well. If it could increase the female percentage of pilots from the low double digits, triple that, we've solved part of the problem. So that's item number one. The second thing,
what is it that's going to attract, do you think, more female pilots to the industry then?
So the first thing in our view we've got to do is starting early in schools and making sure everyone is aware that this is a career path available to everyone. Make it interesting, make it exciting, as we're doing with STEM on the engineering side, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit as well. First thing is this is a great, exciting industry and it's accessible to everyone. And female pilots, male pilots, pilots from different socioeconomic backgrounds, it is a career path that is accessible. So I think we start early and then we stay with them as they come through their school journey and make sure they're aware that this is a really accessible career path and an exciting one.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those jobs, it's almost on everyone's bucket list of jobs that you'd love to do.
Yes.
And then you think, oh, it's so good a job.
Exactly.
I don't think I'd ever get into it.
Exactly. And now is the first time, is the best time for folks to become a pilot, because there's been a real shift in the demographic of pilots. So we extended the retirement age in a lot of countries. Right. That is now coming up to an end. There's a huge amount of growth. So for someone starting now, they will probably be able to, move from the right hand to the left hand seat in the quickest amount of time, probably in the last 2 or 3 decades. So I think it's a really exciting time. It's very beneficial financially. It's something that we think as a career path can really move entire families into different economic situations. Yeah. And then, like you said, I think it's just an exciting, wonderful place to work. And as pilots always say, they have the best office going.
Yeah. So I stopped you then. You said about diversifying it in terms of the gender mix.
Yes.
I think you're going to go on to say some other areas we could look at.
Yeah, and I think you touched on the different international regions as well, right? So there's different areas in which, pilots have been untapped. Now, that is coming with also new demand from new carriers as well. So we're seeing a huge amount of growth, for example, in India. It's no secret. We have partnerships right now with Air India and Indigo. Between the two of them, they have about 1,000 aircraft on order and they need the pilots to support that. But whereas historically they might have looked to bring expat pilots in, now we're very much trying to source pilots from India, bringing them over to Florida, over here to the UK to train them, and then sending them back to India. So we've got to look at new markets as well as different areas of diversity.
Yeah. And how does the kind of things that you provide, the technology to train, to retain pilots, how does that help with the industry?
Yes. So I think, we've got to, with pilots, make sure that we're giving them consistent training and a consistent approach to training during their entire career. So what we've launched just here at the Farnborough Airshow is our pilot app. So it's a data analytics based application that a pilot can take with them on their entire career journey to help them understand their career journey, but also look at areas of development. So versus seeing training as something that's a regulatory requirement, pilots have to, for example, twice a year have a recurrent check, and that's often seen as something that's quite onerous for them to keep their license, less of a learning opportunity, more of an exam. With things like using data analytics to continually assess performance, provide opportunities for development and training, we can really be with them on that entire journey, help them become safer and more effective pilots, but also help them become more in tune with what they need to do. So that's just one of the small things we can do.
So this app, this is your own personal career development app, is it?
Exactly.
It goes with you wherever you work.
Exactly. From day one of being a cadet, we can provide it to them. So as they go through their ground school, into their single engine flying, their first solo flight, we can give them feedback. All of our flight academies have data recorders built in, so whether you're on a single engine Cessna, we can provide you feedback as to how that flight went, all the way through to when you're flying an Airbus or a Boeing, and then also taking that feedback from a simulator sortie and explaining what went well and what didn't. And that's just providing that learning environment so that people can better themselves and become more effective.
And the problem that was designed to solve was that some of this data will be lost during a career journey through the industry, and that was a problem for pilots.
There was just no consistency, and no consistency from day one to the last day, and it was also that sense of moving away from training pilots based on the need of a fleet. So if you think about an airline, thinking about how do we think about our A320 pilots as a whole, versus we need to think about that, but let's think about the individual's need and really break it down. When you hear the phrase competency-based training, for example, what that really means is making the training customized to an individual pilot's needs. So it's much more real for them, it's more tangible, and they can see the benefits of it.
Yeah. And would this be something the airlines will maybe pay for the airlines to take part in? It's not the airline, not the pilots themselves that would need
exactly.
to do this. The airline would do this on their own.
You would think of it as part of your normal suite of software or HR tools that you'd receive as an employee of any other company for a very low cost that can then carry that pilot through their entire journey. So it's just another tool in their toolkit they have available to them.
And so, if as you said, you're collecting all this data on pilots and how they're operating, and this is something that's happening for all sorts of reasons throughout the industry. But this is one reason for doing it.
Yes.
Then this data can be used in other areas. So, what sort of areas can this data be used by an airline, for instance?
Sure. So it gives an airline the ability to look at things in a really aggregate way. So we talked about a fleet of A320 pilots, for example, and you could say, generally speaking, how does our A320 fleet of pilots compare to others in the industry? You could then take that down another level and say, we want to look at our A320 performance going into Heathrow versus other airlines as well. How our pilots flying into Heathrow comparing to Gatwick and other parts of Europe, and then you go down a further level and you look at your individual pilots. So it's a way for us to take the various different levels to look at what best practice is, and then really break that down to an individual pilot level. So it gives that airlines that flexibility to look at both safety. So for example, are we operating at the safest possible level dealing with crosswinds, for example? That's one area. And then you look over at efficiency. Are we using the right amount of thrust on takeoff to minimize fuel efficiency? Are we being effective on a taxiway, for example? So we can break it down into a number of different buckets that ultimately help safety and effectiveness.
Yeah, it is interesting because we, MRO Management, we run our Predictive Aircraft Maintenance Conference.
Yes.
Taking place in November this year in Dublin. And this thing came up at that conference last year where obviously you've got pilots that have got a lot of sensors now monitoring their behaviour from a predictive maintenance point of view.
Exactly.
And an interesting sort of aspect of that, which was mentioned at the show, was at our conference, was you do get a bit of pushback from pilots who do not necessarily want to be told how to do their job.
Yes.
So there's a way of doing it to give them the you give them that ability to control and manage what they do.
Exactly.
And show them the outcomes.
Exactly.
Well, because there are clear outcomes in terms of how you fly. And
absolutely.
And airlines want some consistency, and they want to know it's being done in the right way for them. So.
Exactly. And so we have a number of protections available, and different airlines have different arrangements with their pilots. And so, for example, in some airlines, the pilot's not going to want to share individualized data with his or her employer, right? And that works for that particular airline. So we can make that individualized data available to the individual, but then as we bring it up at an airline level, it's anonymized. So there are ways we can deal with that data security piece. But then as we also think about how do we improve things longer term, in that predictive maintenance sense, we can look at, for example, okay, there was a landing that might have been a bit harder than normal, but was it within the parameters, for example, of that landing gear? We can find that out instantaneously now. And if it is a stress point, that's where your predictive maintenance comes in, and we get ahead of that. And that can apply in a whole raft of areas that can really improve downtime. It can make an airline, and even in our case with our own flight academy, we have the same with our cadets, make sure you're applying the right amount of maintenance at the right time to be safe, but to minimize downtime.
This all plays into actually probably the thing that everybody is trying to do in aviation is run fleets in a more effective and efficient way.
Yes.
Because we know there's crunches all over the place, not just in the people, but in the facilities for MRO, etc.
Exactly.
Availability of parts.
Yes.
We've got the issues of new aircraft coming on stream. So everything's pushing in this direction. That actually an industry that creates and generates huge amounts of data.
Yes.
They need to start using that data for operational reasons. So are we seeing that happening now?
Yeah, I mean, airlines have always stored a huge amount of data. So there's a requirement around what's called a Flight Operations Quality Assurance System, or FOQA. So there's always been a requirement to store that data, but historically in a lot of cases it's just been there in the case there was an incident so we could look backwards. And that's, we build, and we're the world's leading flight data recorder business. That's, a flight data recorder has historically been seen as a disaster recovery device. Right. There's an incident, we look into the recorder, we find out what happened, and we make sure it never happens again. But what it actually is, and the same with the FOQA system, is it's data. And so you don't need to wait until something happens to look at that data. We can analyze it, and particularly with the advancements in things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, take that data, make it digestible, turn it into information, and look at predictive insights. So what are the trends telling us? What can we look at, whether it's around safety, whether it's around effectiveness? You can look at all different areas. You mentioned predictive maintenance. You can look at employee retention, all of those types of things. It's better leveraging that data to provide better outcomes. And we're looking to position ourselves much more as a partner for an airline or an OEM to help them find those insights that are relevant to them.
Yeah. But the industry is famously quite conservative when it comes to change. It kind of has to be,
yes, of course,
especially at operational level.
Yes.
And everyone gets that, and no one wants them to take risks on that
yes.
level. But some of this stuff does require change. It requires even management change and
yes.
cultural change as well.
Yes.
Do you think is the industry sort of really embracing that now? And maybe COVID was sort of the push into that area. We can't carry on doing things as we normally. Let's question everything.
Yeah, and I think that as always, you sometimes need an impetus to really look at things in a different way. I do think the industry has always been exceptional at incremental gains, particularly in safety and effectiveness. It's an industry that has never stood still, and that's why we've got the wonderful safety record we have now. But with all the change that's happened post 2020, it has provided an opportunity to say, well, this is how we've done this. Is this the right way? The example we used before, competence-based training, something that previously was thought of as a nice to have. Now, when you're really thinking about how we can better train an individual, and actually, is that something that can help retention, with retention being a big issue in the industry, let's have a look at that. And what are the barriers to making that happen? And then we have a willingness of regulators to really work at removing any barriers from a regulatory standpoint, because ultimately they know it improves safety. Yeah.
Are we seeing a shift from you mentioned regulators?
Yes.
There has to be regulators. We get that.
Yes.
They are part of the industry as much as anybody else.
Yes.
Do you see a changing attitude there? Maybe a more not a laissez-faire as such, but actually let's try and just help the industry to progress.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned COVID, and that was actually a real way for us to accelerate testing some of the change and making sure it worked and was safe. So an example in our academy would be our ground school, whereas historically we had folks coming in for 6 months to do the ground school and then they'd go on to fly. That was almost impossible during COVID. So we worked with the regulator here, the CAA, and also EASA, and then also over in the US, to enable a hybrid approach of remote combined with in-person, so that we could continue the cadets along that pipeline. So having come out of COVID, we could get folks back in, but is there a way where that hybrid approach is going to make for better effective learning? Some folks learn better when they can pace themselves through online learning, and then they come in to do their exams, and the regulators have been very supportive of that. So a small example of those learnings coming out of COVID that we can reapply now and do things better. Yeah.
I'll just go back to this chat we had about people and the industry being appealing to more people. again, it's a post-COVID discussion, isn't it? Really, a lot of people are moving into jobs where they can work from home, remotely, and so on. Aviation doesn't really offer that opportunity.
No.
It's the opposite.
Yes.
By definition. There's also the issue of sustainability as well.
Yes.
And a lot of people choosing industries on that basis.
Yes.
There's a challenge here, isn't there, for aviation? How does it overcome those particular challenges for the next generation of people they're going to need, the talent that's going to come through?
So firstly, we start, with our company, we start with what's our mission, and our mission is to innovate to create safer skies. So that's a really noble mission, and we find once people get into our company and they realise what we do, how it contributes to safety, how tangible it is. When you see aircraft flying around, we always say to people, wouldn't you feel better knowing that we'd had a role in training the pilots, that we've got avionics on board? You can see that. So you get that avgas in the veins, so to speak, and people become excited about the industry. So I think it starts with the noble mission and the excitement. You then move into, as you said, there are different dynamics now in the workplace versus where they used to be. We build things and we deliver tangible services. So our theory is our folks are better together physically, but there are different ways of working now. So if there's talent available in a remote area that doesn't need to physically be where we're building our products, we can also be open to that. But we do try and co-locate our people. We believe we can better solve our problems more quickly. And then we need to move on to things that can help us with retention. So, we're very much focused on creating a culture where folks can feel like they have a voice, that they can relate to the vision, but they can also be candid, that there are different career opportunities available. And thankfully in aviation, people, I think, over time have realised if you want to go from A to B, there's a variety of different paths to get there that can open up some really exciting career opportunities. So we try and make sure that full spectrum is available, but again, it all comes back to, do we have the right mission? Do we have the right candid conversations within our company about what's working and what's not?
That's a very noisy one.
That was slightly noisy.
Pause for that.
And then how does that play out?
On sustainability, there's not a lot the industry can do in terms of it's going to be burning kerosene for the foreseeable future. But it's only when you get in the industry you see how much is happening, technologically speaking, and innovation-wise. It's really eye-opening.
Exactly.
So actually, if for someone who goes, it's just not sustainable, the argument is, well, you can make it sustainable.
And you can make a difference.
You can make a difference.
Exactly right. And there's things I mentioned before, route optimization, minimizing waste on a taxiway. We're looking at, other companies are looking at different fuel technologies. There are so many areas where we can, move towards that carbon neutral goal that OEMs and airlines have. So I would argue it's the opposite. I would argue if, working in an industry where sustainability is a key driver, and if that's a really important goal to you, which is great and noble, you can do a lot in aviation, and you've got a lot of willing companies to work with.
So he's coming back. It's a very noisy fly past. Pretty impressive.
It is.
I think he's saying wrap up, so we'll wrap up now. But let's just wrap up with a few thoughts on the show and how the senses. Like I said, the sun's come out, so we've got a
that always helps.
face.
Yes,
it's not as hot as a few years ago when it was over
40 degrees.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
But what sense? It's first morning or just first afternoon. How do you feel things are going so far, and what do you hope to get out of this?
I think there's a huge amount of excitement. The industry is in a huge upswing, both in terms of commercial and military, and I think people can feel that. Yes, there's challenges. The supply chain challenges persist. Retention is a challenge as well, but they're challenges that are being created because of growth. And what an exciting industry to be in that's growing. And when you see technology like that F-35 flying around, how can you not be excited to be here?
Yeah, and like you say, it's about growth. So if you'll be more worried if we had challenges because there wasn't enough demand.
Exactly right.
There certainly seems to be plenty of that around.
Exactly right. Yeah, I think it's the highest amount of sustainable growth we've seen in this industry for a long time. So couldn't be more excited.
Lovely. All right, Alan, thanks for that.
Pleasure.
We'll leave the F-35 to do its thing.
Fantastic.
Good to speak to you today.
You too. Thanks, Lee. Take care.